Namaste. Today we shall take this journey further of common injury prevention. In the last lecture we talked about neck, how to move it. If you remember it, let me quickly remind you the previous lessons. Previous lesson about the common injury prevention. So we talked about the neck. So I especially mentioned it that if you are doing forward bend using your neck, don't just bring your head forward and then downward. Rather push your chin back and then upward. If you're doing a back bend, if you're doing forward bend, push your chin backward and downward. So if you're doing a forward bend, chin back down. If you're doing back bend, chin forward and up. So you should be playing with the chin. I also talked to you for a better position of the twisting of the neck. So if you're twisting your neck right side, lift the right ear slightly up. If you're twisting your neck to the left side, lift your left side of the neck slightly up. Then we talked about the wrist, and I said that do not put too much pressure onto the wrist. Do enough warm up. I also suggested you some exercises there. And then we talked about shoulder. We especially talked about two movements of the shoulder, especially if the hand is overhead or downward. So if you are having weight overhead, like let's say you are doing downward facing dog, or let's say you're lifting anything overhead, make sure you push the shoulders forward and higher. If you push the shoulder forward and higher, your shoulder will tend to rotate out and muscle engagement will occur, which will not let the pressure come to the shoulder. And outward rotation of the shoulder also creates space for the shoulder, and it allows you to avoid the compression. Further, we talked about if the position of the palm is in front, like plank or up dog, or any position where your hand is below your shoulder and you are bearing weight into that position, you should try to push your shoulder down and forward, and this engages your armpit muscle, your chest muscle, your lat muscle, and keep your shoulder much more strong. And we talked about the example of high plank. So let's say I'm in this position and my shoulder come forward, or if I lift my knees up, my chest falls down, which happens to beginner because maybe they are not strong enough, or perhaps they don't know how to do this position. So we talked that they must push the shoulder forward. But when they're in this position, pushing the shoulder forward means lifting the chest upward. So in relation to the chest, shoulder has come forward. And then when they push the palms to the floor, they should also try to push the shoulders back to the hip. So shoulders are trying to move to the hip and palms are pressing against the floor. This will also keep the neck free, and this will give you a much more stable position for the hand. It will also keep your shoulder much more stable. Today I'm going to talk about lower back. Now lower back injury could happen into forward bend, back bend position. Even it can happen in twisting, and it can also happen in weightlifting. But right now I'll be talking about movement first. In weightlifting, the best way to avoid injury is always lift. If you're strengthening or if you're even working for flexibility, never target a joint, target the muscles. So if you're doing, let's say, deadlifts or anything, make sure you do these exercises keeping the object close to you, and also you do not let the pressure go to the joint. Rather, use the muscles to take the lift. Other thing that you can add is keep your spine in neutral position whenever you're lifting weight. That will keep the body weight going through the body, and it will not let the pressure fall onto one particular spot. That could be the reason of injury. Now talking about forward bend here. In forward bend position, there are different ways to bend forward. So let's say I'm going to show you here. Generally, why we do forward bend, let's say I'm sitting into this position right now. If you can see that my lower back is arched this way, which is the natural curve of lower back, and my upper back is bending like this, which is natural curve of it, and then the neck is like this. Lower back is arched this way, and if the abdominals are too weak and lower back muscles are stiff, this arch goes on, and this could become excessive in future, and that could lead to compression to the lower back, or could also lead to instability to it. These people may have too weak abdomen and could also cause compression to the lower back if they lift heavy or do any back bend position. So we do forward bend actually to strengthen our abdominal muscle. So when these muscles are strong, they will hold that curve and will not let that become exaggerated. Further, we do forward bend to release the tension from the lower back. But the common mistake we make while we are performing any forward bend is, if I'm doing forward bend, see, I'm going to show you two types of forward bend for the spine. One is when I'm letting my shoulder fall down, rounding my back Well, this position, if you see me from side or if you see me from behind, you'll notice that my back looks quite stretched. But at the same time, if you see me from front, I look very compressed. I can't really breathe. My belly is very soft because gravity has made me look like this. Many times when people are feeling lazy and they sit for too long, they sit like this, but then they realize that it hurts their lower back. It hurts the lower back, it doesn't hurt their muscles, generally because this position causes compression to the lower back. So, well, right now gravity is pulling you. Now, let's say if you are doing any forward bend position, let's say you're doing seated one leg forward bend. Many people, what they do, especially beginners, they hunch their hip, they grab their foot and then they pull forward and down. When you are bending forward with the help of gravity, 1, 2, you are using a hinge to pull you. This method makes this posture much more passive than it should be, and then that puts a lot of pressure to the lower back. So if you want to avoid that pressure, it is important that the movement you're performing should not be so much of the passive, rather you try to make it active, and you will not be bending it like you are going to break it, but you'll bend it for more like an extension. So most of the beginners are taught in the beginning that keep the spine straight then bend forward. Well, this type of forward bend doesn't really work too much for the spine, but this helps them stretch their thigh. But in the beginning, because we do not want to put too much load onto the spine, so we say keep the spine straight. But that doesn't help the spine to become stretch and release the tension from back, and that also doesn't help them increase the strength into the core. So if you want to build strength into the abdomen, you should be doing posture like active forward bends. Active forward bends means, example, boat pose. Boat pose is a good example of active forward bend. See, I'm bending toward my leg, or leg is bending towards me, and it is against gravity. That's why it is active. It can also become active if I'm here and I try to raise my legs up. This is very active position for my legs. My core is much more engaged. It is not going to compress my lower back. Rather, it will make my lower back muscles release, and it will keep my core much more firm and strong. Now I'm going to show you a movement that will give you a different idea of how forward bend should be working. Well, most of the time we say that bending spine like this is wrong, and this idea is completely wrong, that calling this position wrong. Well, this position becomes wrong when you do it with laziness, when you do it and it falls pressure to the joint. It becomes wrong when something is forcing you into the position. But let's say if I am doing this position, which is tabletop, and you know that we even ask beginners to practice this, we ask them to round the back. Now if you see in this position that my back is rounded, but this position we don't consider wrong and bad. The reason this position for lower back is not compressive but more stretching. So I'm going to give you an idea how to stretch the back here. So if you're doing a forward bend, you should be attempting this instead of collapsing into front. So what you do is, you have to first push your sitting bones down, then take your navel inside, take your ribs inside, take your chest inside, and hands forward. So if you do this action, you can see me right now. I'll show you from behind that how my back looks stretched. I'm going to push my sitting bones down, take my ribs in, take my navel in, take my chest in, and hands forward. If you see me from back, I look very much stretched. My spine looks rounded. But this round, if you actually see me from front, this round doesn't make me feel collapsed. Rather, it keeps me elongated and still stretch my back. So make sure whenever you're attempting to do a forward bend posture, you are not collapsing and being lazy. You are not letting gravity do it. You are not letting your hand pull you. Rather, you are using your front body engagement to make yourself feel relaxed and stretch on the back. So let's say if I'm going to do a forward bend, so I'll be demoing you two things here. One way to do a forward bend is collapsing into it and then trying to pull forward. On the other hand, the other way is I'm not going to collapse down. I'll be pulling my navel up, chest up, and then I bend forward. Now if you see, I'm also stretching my thigh a little bit, and I'm also stretching my back, but I'm not collapsing from my front, and it also helps me keep my breath calm and I can relaxedly breathe. So further you will be learning about this in detail in your alignment class, but I am here just to let you know that do not collapse, because that compresses the lower back. Rather, keep your back broad and front also expanded. Moving forward, talking about backward bending posture. So if you are doing a back bend position, most of the people see As we just talked about this, our lower back is arched this way and upper back is arched this way. So if I'm doing a back bend, most of the people have lower back pain reason the lower back is already arched like this, and if they bend backward, it arches even more. But what you should be doing is, we should be doing back bend for upper back, not for lower back. So see the difference. Okay, I'm going to show you two types of back bend. One back bend is, if I bend backward like this back bend is creating more arch even in my lower back, and it even feels compressive and painful for my lower back. You can even do it for yourself. And this is what many people do. Well, I've seen this on Instagram a lot. Many fancy people arch their back like this and then they bend backward, which causes even pain to people who don't know that how they have done it. Maybe you do it with certain other intention and technique which is helpful to you, but if you are following someone else and then trying to do the same, it can really be hurtful and painful. So what you rather do is, I'm going to show you movement here. Keep your sitting bone down. Instead of letting yourself collapse forward, focus on lifting your chest. The bone here is called sternum. Focus here on lifting the chest forward and up. So this movement, if you see this movement, it is a back bend. It opens my chest. It allows me to feel much more exposed, and it also doesn't compress my lower back. So make sure you don't do back bend by arching lower back. Instead, you do it by lifting chest forward and up. So let's say I'm going to do a posture here, like upward facing dog for an example. So if you see people who have generally lower back pain, well, girls are among them because they are very flexible. And when you're too flexible, you generally tend to compress your joint because your muscle tension doesn't hold you back. So let's say I'm here, and if I push myself backward, it can be lower back compressing. Even I can feel it right now. But instead of pushing myself back, if I pay attention to lift my chest forward and up, this gives me completely different feeling and different type of stretch. It may be looking same in the video or picture, but if you try to do it yourself, you will have completely different experience with that. So what I mean to say is, don't collapse into the back, rather focus on lifting the chest forward and higher, and that will give you a much more safer back bend, and the back bend will be much more mobilization for your upper back instead of compressing your lower back. Okay, moving further towards your hamstring. And hamstrings, as we know that in yoga world, if you don't know hamstring, perhaps you are new to yoga or new to fitness. So hamstrings are the most popular muscle which are under constant tension in most of the poses, especially if you are doing even a back bend or a forward bend. So in back bend, if you try to raise your leg up, your hamstring becomes tight, and if you are doing forward bend, they get stretched, and again they are under tension. And if you are a fan of Ashtanga, and especially if you've been practicing Ashtanga primary series, you'll notice that there are so many poses which are focusing upon forward bend. And if you do so many forward bend with the same intention, that you have to pull your hamstring to become more flexible and keep your spine straight when you are in any forward bend, you will end up stretching your hamstring so much that it could also be injured. So I'm going to tell you a little about hamstring, that how it stretches, and then how you can avoid overstretching it in any forward bend asana. So hamstring is a group of muscle actually, and it is located behind the thighs. Hamstrings are three different muscles. I may be not naming it here, but there are three different muscles, and one muscle even have two section of it, and they attach to your sitting bone. These are one of the junky muscle into the body, and they are quite strong. Now these are primary muscle for walking as well. Now this muscle is attached to the knee, below knee, and goes over, touches the sitting bone. Hamstring muscle crosses two different joints, and it is considered as multi-joint crosser muscle. So this muscle crosses your knee and crosses your hip. This is why it has function for both of them. Hamstring will help your knee to bend. So it is the knee bender muscle. We can say it is knee flexor muscle because knee bending means flexion of the knee. Let's not make it complicated. So hamstring helps you bend the knee. Okay, so as I just explained, the job of hamstring is to bend the knee and to lift the thigh up. So if you really want to engage your hamstring immensely, you bend the knee and lift your thigh up. Sometimes if you are a beginner and if you try to do this, you can even have cramps into your hamstring. Because if you try to engage a muscle too hard, especially a muscle which is crossing two different joints, and if you engage it from both the ends, it can give you feel cramps. But with practice it will go away. Now on the other hand, if you want to stretch the hamstring, in order to stretch the hamstring, what you have to do is, you have to, since it is crossing your knee, so you have to straighten the knee, action 1. And then since it is crossing your hip from behind, so you have to bend forward. So the job of hamstring is to bend the knee and take the leg back. So you have to do opposite. You have to bring the leg forward and straighten the knee. So if you do these two actions, if you look at me right now, I'm going to demonstrate a hamstring stretch here. If I keep my knee straight and bend forward, the role of spine doesn't matter in this case. Hamstring has not much to do with your spine. It has all to do with the movement of your hip and your knee. So if you can keep your knee straight and bend forward from the hip, or bend from the hip and then straighten the knee, these both actions help you stretch your hamstring. Now every forward bend that we do are primarily being done focusing on this, that if I bend forward, I'll bend forward with straight spine and then keep the knee straight. Most of the people teach it this way. But sometimes even if you bend the spine, that can even make this stretch go worse because the tension becomes too much also in your upper back. Now, since you're doing too many forward bends, and if you every time have this intention to stretch the hamstring, like trying to keep the spine straight and trying to keep the knee straight every time you bend forward, you'll stretch your hamstring over. And if you stretch your hamstring over, it can get inflamed or injured, it can get torn, and then you may have to take some rest for that. So you better don't stretch it too much. Rather, sometimes you gently stretch it and allow other body parts to come into stretch. For an example, if I'm doing forward bend, and if I bend forward with straight spine, most of the time that is going to put stress onto my hamstring. But what I would rather do is, I would bend from the hip to the point where I feel very gentle stretch, and then I try to bend from the spine. Bending from the spine, as I explained in the lower back aspect, that when you bend forward, don't collapse into that, rather pull your navel in, ribs inward, chest inward, then hands forward. If you do forward bend like this, you will have gentle spread stretch throughout the back instead of just stretching your hamstring. So even if you are doing forward bend, like let's say downward facing dog is a good example for that. Let me demonstrate downward facing dog. So if you are doing downward facing dog, keeping your hip or lower back arched like this, and then most of the people do downward facing dog like this. When they keep their hip in this position and when they go up and their spine remains straight, and when they try to press their heels down, it immensely stretches the hamstring. And when hamstring stretch so much, again it could be the reason of injury. Well, not always a muscle get injured when you stretch it, but if you constantly or repetitively stretch it for every asana you do, especially if you are practicing, Ashtanga Vinyasa or Vinyasa flow, where people, have their much more attention on forward bend posture, down dog, sun salutation, and then if you every time force it that way, that one is the reason of injury. So what you want to do is, the suggestion for you is, whenever you're doing any forward bend, don't keep your attention or purpose just to stretch your hamstring, but forward bend must be done to stretch the whole of the back. So let me demo a posture for you, like even down dog. So your down dog, if done, is like this. Take a look at this position. If you can see right now that my spine is stretched from back, but here my spine is stretched more from front, like not my spine but my abdominal muscles are stretching, and in this position my back muscles are stretching. Now let's say I'm doing downward facing dog as the counter pose to upward facing dog. So surely this concept is going to be wrong, that if I do down dog with straight spine, because if I do down dog with straight spine means it is slightly extended, means it's slightly bending backward. So I must be doing downward facing dog, considering that it is counter pose to upward facing dog. So your spine must remain in forward bend position instead of arched back, because arched back will basically focus upon hamstring stretch and will not really allow your back of the muscles to stretch. So what you would be doing is, when you are in down dog, you can train yourself this way. So first bring yourself in cat position. Now you see my back is also stretching. Then hold that back stretch and then try to lift the knees and straighten the knees and push back. And I will try to hold that cat position in my spine because if I keep on holding the cat position in my spine, that allows the stretch to be released from hamstring. That also allows my upper back to stretch and not makes the posture much more refined instead of hamstring stretch. Remember, forward bends are going to stretch your hamstring, but it doesn't mean they only stretch your hamstring. They are done for several other reasons and intentions. For example, forward bend can be done sometimes because you just want to move. Sometimes you want to bend the spine. Sometimes you want to engage your core. Sometimes you want to relax. Sometimes you want to bow down. Sometimes you want to bring the blood towards your head. And sometimes you just want to move. Sometimes you want to stretch the hamstring now. But every time if you think of hamstring stretch, even you can become bored of practicing the asana. Now let's do the same into Uttanasana, which is forward bend. So there is one way to do Uttanasana, which is when my legs are straight, back is straight, and I'm going forward. Instead of doing this, what I should do is, when I'm here, I pull my navel up and then push my shoulder down, head down. As you can see myself, my back is rounding, but this round is similar to the round which you see in cat position instead of this round, which is injurious to the lower back. Now moving further towards the knee, and about knee, if you are considering to, let's say we do forward bend postures, and many times we are asked to pull the kneecap up for many people, and there are some people who may have hyperextended knees. There's a test for hyperextended knees in general. So if you keep your leg straight here, and if you keep your palm under your knee, if your palm can slide under your knee, mostly you have, your knee is not really hyperextended, but if your palm doesn't even, it doesn't get under your knee because your knee is touching the floor and heel is lifting up perhaps, that can be the sign of hyperextended knee. So, well, hyperextension is not a problem. It is said hyper because few people, most people have neutral position of the knee, and if you have more than that normal range, you are considered hyper. Well, but hyperextension is not really bad. It is bad in certain conditions. Example, if you're lifting weight and your knees are straight. So for you, your knees are not actually straight, they are much more straight than they should be. And in that case, body weight is not falling towards your legs, rather it is falling even backward, and that can make the knee feel even worse. So talking about knee, we have to understand that how knee, foot and hip works, how they work in relation to one another. So for that, I'm going to demonstrate some movement and then I shall talk what to do. So knee can rotate when your knee is bent, but when it is straight, if you try to rotate the knee, actually movement happens at the hip. So it is important that when you are in the position where your knees are straight, if you try to rotate your foot, that should come from the hip. It means, let's say I'm doing some position where I turn my foot out, but I turn my hip the other side, like triangle pose is a good example. That's what people do. They try to push their foot that way and turn their hip this way or facing forward. For some people, because their hip doesn't rotate so well, so when they try to push their foot so much and their hip does not twist so much, so then the pressure comes to the knee. So how to check that? So what we'll do is we will bend the knee. So the moment you bend the knee, you will notice that if your hip could not move so much, and when you bend the knee in this position, your knee, instead of being on top of your ankle, it will fall inside. Let me show you from this angle. So see, right now my foot and knee are in the same line, right? So let's say I'm in the position of triangle position and then I bend my knee. Right now my foot and knee is in the same direction, which is a good position for my knee to be safe. But let's say I keep my knee straight and turn myself this way because I want to do triangle. And a common mistake in triangle, people say that do not keep your body weight facing there, rather make your body face the other side than the foot. So if in this position, if I bend my knee, as you can see that because I feel tightness into my hip is not so mobile, it makes my knee fall in. And in that case, it means when I was trying to hold this position with straight knee, I had some pressure on my knee, but sometimes it cannot be felt. But when you bend the knee, you realize that what is the actual knee position is. So what I want you to understand is you should always try to keep your knee and foot facing the same direction, especially if you're doing any weight bearing position. Otherwise it could really be potentially dangerous for the knee. So let's say if I'm doing some position where I'm bending forward, I should keep my toes and knees facing forward. If I am performing goddess position where I am bending downward and weight is going that way, so it is okay for my knee and foot to face that direction. But let's say I'm doing warrior position and I'm going that way. So again, knee should face the direction of the foot. But in case that my foot is that way and I bend this way, this could put some pressure to the knee. Well, it's not really bad sometimes. Sometimes having gentle pressure to the body is okay, but some pressure could be dangerous, especially for a beginner who is not trained enough and not strong with the legs. So being a beginner, we should not play with such positions. So what to do to avoid knee injury is try to keep your knee, foot facing the same direction in whatever position you are leaning towards the knee. So for an example, if you are doing even squat, or if you are doing deadlifts, let's say, if you are doing any, let's say you are doing squats with some weight. So this is a common mistake people make, is when they push their knee, sometimes the knee falls inward. Now why this is wrong is, it is wrong because let's say if the body weight is going this way, you can easily see that right now the center of gravity is not towards the foot, it's more in the middle of the foot. That is why you will notice that your inner foot presses too much because of the gravitational force. In order to keep your joints safe and not put too much pressure onto one part of the body, it is important that we let the weight, let's say I have some load on my lower back, so that load or pressure or force must travel towards my hip, towards my knees and towards my feet and then reach the floor. If I'm in this position, let's say, right now you can easily see that my lower back is forcing me downward and the force is going down towards the floor. This is why for some people it can cause lower back pain. Same if I do plank and if my lower back sags down to the floor like this, most probably it is because central gravity is pulling you down. So how to keep it safe is, we have to keep our body in the position with the help of muscle engagement or with some effort, that the body weight tries to move towards the foot and then reach the floor, because feet are the foundation for transferring the weight to the gravity and to the floor. So giving you example, let's say if I'm doing this position like triangle or any position where I lean toward the straight leg, as you can see right now that the body weight is going this way, the center of gravity is this way. This is why many people will feel too heavy heel but toes will be free. Many people will feel that knee is pushing downward. Many people will feel that their hip is pushing downward. This position for some people could be a little injurious, because right now the weight is, instead of going towards the foot, it's going downward. So what to do? What we should be doing to transfer the weight that way? One simple thing that you can do is you bend the knee. The moment you bend the knee, the weight stops going downward and it shifts slightly toward the foot, and you can easily realize that by doing it for yourself. Other thing, being an advanced practitioner or even a beginner, what you do to avoid that is you try to push the foot. Imagine you're pushing the foot that side, like I'm trying to do this but not really moving my foot. So when I try to put my foot against the floor forward, that creates a force this way and let the body weight travel through the foot to the floor instead of letting the weight go downward. And pressing the foot forward also engages your calf, and when your calf muscle feels engaged, it does not let the knee go down because it bends the knee actually. So being a beginner or even an advanced practitioner, if you want to keep your knees safe, make sure any position you are practicing, you try to keep your knee and foot facing the same direction. Now let's say I'm doing position like warrior B. You will notice that some people knee falls inward. Why it happens? Because if the hip doesn't rotate so well, for example, if I try to rotate my foot, then because teacher also instructs you keep your body facing this way. Now if your foot has rotated 90 degrees and then you try to move it this way, it means you are actually totally moving from the hip. But let's say if your hip doesn't allow you to move 90 degrees, how to understand that if your hip cannot move more than that, you start to feel little stiffness into the hip, or you start to feel gentle pressure at the knee. And again, let me repeat that if you bend the knee, you will notice that actually your knee was under stress
because your hip was not allowing you to move. So what to do in such position is, you have two options. Either you can compromise with the position of the hip or compromise with the position of foot. So what you can do is, one simple thing that you do is, or many people would do is, they turn the hip toward the knee. So the knee comes on top of the foot and knee becomes or comes in a better position where it feels much more stable. Or if you do not want to compromise with the hip, you can compromise with the foot position and you turn your foot slightly toward the direction of the knee, so your foot can press the floor very firmly and can give you a better grip, and in this way you'll be keeping your knee in much more or much safer position. So this is for the knee prevention. Further, some people have half extended knees. Half extended knees means, see, when we bend the knee, this movement is called flexion, and when we straighten the knee, this is called extension. Now some people, like if we see the normal range for the knee, it is 180 degrees angle, or if I stand straight, knee is just above the ankle. But for some people who are hyper flexible, their knee may be beyond their ankle. If the knee is far beyond the ankle when they stand, I cannot do it so exaggeratedly because I do not have that position. But if my knee moves more than my ankle when I'm standing straight, that generally tells that that is half extension. I've also mentioned it before when we were sitting. Now, in such cases, hyperextension is not really a problem, but when you have hyperextended knee, and especially if you pull the thigh or engage the quads, like by pulling the kneecap up, which is the basic instruction, that can even make it worse. So to avoid that, what you should do is, simple idea is, one thing you can do is keep the knee bent. Other thing you can do is try to push the foot forward. So basically, we don't want weight to travel down. We don't want weight to travel to the knee to the floor. We want weight to travel from knee to foot and then to the floor. So this is about your common injury prevention. In the further lecture, we shall talk about joint. Namaste.